So welcome again. My name is Nicole and I am with Outfront Solutions. I'm joined by my business partner, Jeanine and our dear friend and colleague, Judy Shapiro of Engage Simply. We are here to talk to you about 3 ways to build a trusted brand, and really excited to jump into it today. Just a little bit of background on us. Jeanine and I have Outfront Solutions. We're a branding, marketing, business strategy firm, and we stand alongside a lot of trusted partners and trusted brands and clients. And we offer the services that are pictured here in this ikigai. So ikigai is a Japanese construct, and it's a reason for being. And so we do all these things, but what I want to point out is that in the center of everything we do, we're really looking at purpose and results. And we're focused on aligning with your purpose, whether you're a client or a partner or a friend or a colleague, and really, driving to results. And that's how we operate in the world. So one of the things that came up on the topic of trust, front and center, is PricewaterhouseCoopers has deemed trust as the new business currency.
And I want to add that they have a regular podcast on this topic. And part of what they do in that podcast is they bring forward some of the studies. You might all know about the Edelman Trust Barometer. So for every year, for maybe a couple of decades now, they've been managing trust. But what's interesting, I just want to throw out a couple of things from the PwC on this topic, which is that the disconnect between what we leaders think and what employees think, for example, or there's quite a big difference. So when you're talking about trust and measuring it, you're talking about trust with employees, trust for businesses, NGOs, governments, etc. You're talking about customers, and you're talking about yourself as an employer. Trust runs across all of those things. So a couple of fun stats, or maybe not so fun, is that 87% of executives think that customers highly trust their companies, yet the stats show that it's about 30% of customers who actually highly trust their companies. And from an employee standpoint, about 71% of employees say that if they lose trust in their company, they're going to leave. One of the interesting things I've seen in watching this barometer over these years, interestingly, is that this isn't so interesting. The trust for governments has dropped. I'm always interested in the fact that trust for NGOs dropped, and in the last year, business trust ticked up a little bit, in certain areas. So I'm just saying that there's a lot of issues trusts have to do with. We're going to talk about them shortly.
Yeah, so we wanted to check in with you all today. If you'd like to put in the chat, how are you feeling today? It's the year of the rabbit. This weekend is the Chinese New Year, and it's the year of the water rabbit. And so there's a lot of hope with that. But how are you feeling today? What's your trust level like? Pop it in the chat. We want to see how you're doing. All right, Nicole's feeling fabulous. Oh, lots of greats. Oh, good. Happy to see.
It's true that when you've got trust, you also feel comfortable. You're not so anxious. You're not so nervous about things when you have some trust. Yeah, we feel so hopeful about 2023. This rabbit thing is really working.
Grateful. Beautiful.
All right, so let's just move on. We wanted to just set some, kind of a baseline for some things about what are some of the underlying principles of a trusted brand, right? And I think you're going to know a lot. I mean, these are all pretty obvious things, but they're good to keep in mind when you're thinking about how to build it, right? They're kind of good building blocks. The only one that I'm going to mention is affiliations. Like one of the things that we do when we're branding a new company, let's say, or even an existing one, is we will make sure that those who we do business with, who are our partners, those who we do co-promotions with, those whose logos we appear on the same page as, are at the same level or higher level, more highly regarded than ours, the same or better. So beware of your affiliations when you're building your trusted brand. And I'm also going to just touch on transparency, because once upon a time, everybody didn't know everything about everything. But today, with we have so much visibility and there's so much user-generated content that you really have to you have to know that anything that you put in writing can become public. Anything that you do will become public. And that puts a real onus on you to behave in a very ethical and trustworthy manner. Would anybody else, Nicole or Judy, would you like to pop in on this one?
Well, I love how you started with the word true, and that is obvious, but it's a principle. It's a guiding light, and you'd be surprised how important that is to keep front and center.
Yeah, and authentic. I'll talk about that, but really showing up authentically. And so that's an inside job and an external job, and communicating that, right?
And it's not so easy all the time as a company to make sure that you're really towing that line. So,
one other reminder I wanted to add is that when we're talking about brands, we're not just talking about company brands. We're talking about your personal brand or your executive brand as well. So keep that in mind as we roll through this information, these statistics, some, anecdotes, that this absolutely 100% applies to a company brand and a personal or executive brand.
And on that note, just consistency is a critical aspect of brand building and trust building, because as you know, trust isn't built in a day. So we want to talk about how to know, that you're a trusted brand. And these are actually KPI-driven, measurable things that you can do to know and that you can work against. And Judy's an expert in conversion and KPI. She is the KPI queen. So, Judy, would you talk a little bit about some of these?
Sure. Trust. Every CEO will say we should be a trusted brand, and when that gets translated into programs, it kind of is hard to know whether or not we've accomplished anything. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of them just to give you some sense of some of the KPIs. So awareness is usually a straight function of share of voice. If you're in a market, what % of your audience actually even is aware of you, which is different and builds on the next one, which is familiarity, which is, do they know what you do? So oftentimes you'll say to yourself, oh, I've heard of that company, but you have no idea what they do. So the KPI around awareness is usually things like share of voice, SOV. Familiarity tends to be attributes. People understand what you do. Again, a very specific KPI. They know we're in cloud storage or we sell tea. Doesn't really matter. Some of the other ones that are KPI driven, they're all KPI driven, but some of the ones that are really importantly KPI driven are ones like loyalty. What % of your customers come back for more? Buy something else? Over what period of time? Those are all very specific CRM KPIs that are easily within a CRM system like a HubSpot or a Salesforce. Engagement, this is really where the role of content becomes really dominant. So you can understand, let's say on your website, which content is actually getting discovered, which are ones that people are sharing, those kinds of things. And then the final one with community, which speaks to a broader thing than just what the KPIs are, but how is your community growing? How is it engaging? Are you seeing net increases in impressions? For instance, in Twitter, you can see month to month your impressions. So if you start at 100 impressions a month and you get to 500, then you know you're doing the right thing and you're on the right track. And that's a KPI because communities where trust is really the most bonded to a performance on the business side. So if you have a strong community, if you build a strong community, that will actually get the job done. And it'll begin to create new business for every customer.
And I want to just pop in on the community thing. One of the things that I've always, that I love and really I think is a great indicator of trust of your brand is when your community takes your brand and runs with it, right? And they start creating new content around it. We have a client called Baby Quip, and Baby Quip provides rental equipment to traveling parents. But that community took that, they created their own support community, they created their own tools, and they've grabbed and made that brand their own. You know, that's a super strong brand, right?
Exactly
So
right.
I love that.
Yeah.
And, you know,
And I love the fact that, again, to just highlight the fact with what Judy started off with, and, Judy's a deep expert in digital marketing and measurement. And so this is all measurable, right? It's not left to subjectivity. And this is knowable to all of us as business leaders and marketers. So there are literally KPIs around absolutely everything. In the past, this was not the case, but we can measure all of this. And so really listen to Judy, because she's I always love it. You always have so many great insights, and like, I'm always taking notes.
One other thing to add to here also is that we're engaged in the sometimes the exits, and we're always engaged in the increased valuation of companies. And these are things that acquirers will look for. The loyalty of the longevity of your customers, your net promoter score. These are the indicators of a strong and valuable brand.
Correct. Exactly right. Exactly right.
Okay. So it really matters whether you're an established brand or whether you're whether you're a new brand, the tactics and what you're trying to achieve, right? And how you go about it, right? So an established brand, for example, you can measure, you can say, okay, where am I now? You do your net promoter score, you know where you are, and you have a goal. I want to increase trust, or I want to increase loyalty, whatever it is. But if you have a negative trust rating as an established brand, it is super hard to change that. And I'm sure you've heard that before, that repositioning is way harder than positioning. So if you're just getting your brand off of the, out of the gate, paying a lot of attention to the idea of trust and how to build it is really critical. If you're an established brand and you're having to either turn around or amplify your trust factors, there's different tactics. So I'd like to invite my co-presenters to talk about this a little bit. Nicole, do you want to say anything about these two approaches to trust building?
I want to hear Judy, because you have so many.
I do.
Yeah. And, I know you have so many concrete stories. So,
yeah. So one of the things that we find is a big challenge in trust creation is being able to know what to do at what point in your business's life cycle. So in established brands, there is this frantic need to try and do everything. And what usually ends up happening is nothing gets done well. So the key for new brands is to really pick 3 or 4 things to knock out of the gate, right? Don't try and do everything right away. So established credentials is an example. It could mean a million different things. It could mean partner referrals. It could mean using a platform that pops up on a website that says every time somebody gave you a 5-star rating. And if you want to establish credentials, then really double down with multiple tactics against that. But don't try and do everything. If you try and do everything as a startup, you will fail, because as Jeanine said wisely, it takes a moment to break trust. So if you're a startup and you're just trying to build your reputation and you crap out in something that's critical, it's hard to recover from that. It's very difficult to recover from that. Whereas established brands tend to just kind of put it on coast, right? It's like set it and forget it. Oh, we're a trusted brand until something happens, right? And that's also dangerous, because trust is built continually over time. There's not a moment where you can say, gee, I'm done. My trust job is done. That's just not how it works. So things like the customer experience, communication, and I want to talk a little bit later about how to organize your content strategies. It's really critical that we understand that. But communications, what are you giving out to the world, your customers, your prospects, that is of genuine value? It's not just about, oh, here's our latest release of whatever. Not many people care, but more importantly, that's about you. When you're an established brand, it always has to be externally facing. What do you need as my customer, as my audience? And when I say external, I mean from a communications. Let's not forget the internal part that Jeanine absolutely mentioned earlier, which internally you have to feed your internal trust engine as well. People have to want to come to work. They have to want to participate in your greater vision. So it's always about the other. It's never about what you have to sell.
Yeah. And when we swoop in to work with companies, we do just a ton of research in and around that organization. So we understand, as I mentioned earlier, it's an inside job and it's super important to communicate authentically. So we really get to understand the culture internally to authentically communicate and be in alignment. Because if you don't do that and it's not in alignment, it is apparent to external audiences really quickly. And so, demonstrating those values. But I love what you said, Judy, about pick a few things. Don't try to do absolutely everything to win over trust, because that's it costs a lot. It's, and it's also not really authentic. So a lot of ways that we like to help companies establish trust right away is by looking at, the external factors, what's going on in the world that may interfere with that trusted relationship with the people and or the brand. And then what are some potential validators when you don't already have trust established yourself as a business? Partners, and the partners you choose and who you surround yourself with in business reflects on your trust very, very strongly. So just by a matter of, we'll put, that we're a part of Leadership Global. That establishes trust right away, because people know we're part of this community. They know that we're authentically standing alongside, we're in service, blah, blah, blah. So I think there are a lot of things that you can do to establish trust right away, and that are also very inexpensive.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to connect another thing. We were talking about what happens when a company, when you have to reposition. Well, one of the things, we do a lot of crisis work at Outfront Solutions. And one of the things that we do as a protective measure is create a great relationship with your customers and create a great relationship with your communities. So if and when, likely, the time comes when you need them, they're there for you. They understand what you do. They have a connection with your brand. They're willing to advocate for you. And that's way stronger than you advocating for yourself, right? So that's one thing I wanted to kind of underline. The other thing I want to underline under new brands, and it really goes on both sides, is the emotionally intelligent part.
Yeah.
You've heard us mention this a lot. And next month, we're having a whole session about emotional intelligence. But when you demonstrate emotional intelligence, what you're doing is you're letting your employees, your customers, your partners, your ecosystem know that you're listening to them, that it's not a one-way street. You're not just pushing stuff at them, but you're actually listening to and responding to them and being sensitive to them. It's an enormous trust builder, to do that. So I just wanted to hit those two. Let's move on, because now we're going to talk about the 3 ways, and relationships, content, and culture. I'm going to hand it over to you, Nicole, to talk about relationships.
Yeah. And I invite you both to jump in here. But in relationships, trust begins with relationships. As Jeanine was just illustrating, if you have a good and deep relationship with your various stakeholders, they will be more engaging, more forgiving, all those things. So it's really important to establish trust and think about all the relationships that surround your business and your brand. And how is it that you're taking care of each and every one of those? And that should be a regular exercise. We do investor relations for a lot of companies, and you wouldn't believe how it's just astounding how a lot of companies are just not communicating regularly. They're not bringing people along. They're not necessarily being transparent. These are all things that establish trust. And so that two-way relationship is really important. And trust is literally the glue that holds business relationships together, right? And trust is something that, all kinds of studies show that trust helps with when you have established trust with business partners, you're spending less time and energy protecting yourself, right? In the engagement. It's a super vital factor for engaging in negotiation. And this is what helps to bring both sides to a positive outcome. Basically the 5 C's of trust are in relationships are these: care, communication, character, consistency, and competence. And we really live by those as we embark and engage in new relationships and relationships around your business. The other thing that always comes up for me, and it's just something that I personally like to practice, is that THINK acronym. So when you're engaging in communication with any of your audiences and relationships, you implement THINK, and the acronym is: the T stands for, is it true? The H is it helpful? I is it inspiring? N, is it necessary? And K, is it kind? And so when I engage in relationship, I'm putting it through that filter a lot of times. Yeah. And we're looking for these win-win scenarios in relationship, right? Where you're coming to the table and you're not always coming to the table with an ask. You're coming to the table with an ask and an offer. And that is a way to build relationship, build trust. And then you can turn to that trusted partner, employee, whomever, and really, and they will be, exceptionally more responsive. So yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to say about relationships and trust. Jeanine and Judy, do you want to add anything to that?
I'd love to. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, I'll do mine quickly, but Nicole, while we're doing that, could you put the C's into the chat?
I am.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I wanted to pop in is kind of a tactical thing, which is that when Nicole was talking about board communications, right? And you think, well, why don't they communicate? Mostly because they're scared. They don't want to tell the board anything bad. They just want everything always to be really super positive, right? But that's not the greatest strategy in anything, because, for example, it doesn't build trust. If you constantly are painting only the rosiest picture, it's just not that believable. So you know how when you're a presenter and you make a mistake, suddenly everybody loves you and trusts you so much more because you've been a little human and they can relate to you. So in the trust factor, it's fine to be human. In fact, it's good to be human. And it's also good to be open and say, hey, these are the things that aren't working so well, but this is how we're going to address them. That builds a lot of trust with all audiences, but particularly it came to mind in the board communications. The other place that comes to mind is in media relations. We never want to say anything that's not perfect. We write a press release, right? When you show two sides or look like you're being more objective, or be more objective, actually, again, builds trust. People say, hey, she's not hiding things from me. So don't be afraid to be honest. Just have answers for the things you need answers for. Bring up the things. If there's elephants in the room, bring them up and address them before somebody goes running off with them on their own. So those are trust builders. The press will trust you more. Your board will trust, your employers will trust you more when you do your all hands and you don't just paint the rosiest picture and you point to what has to be improved.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to say about that. Judy?
Just one very quick point, actually, to answer one of the questions in the chat. Someone commented, forgive me, I just saw quickly, that it's really hard to execute. And that's absolutely true.
Yes.
And this is where, again, I'm the tech voice in this conversation, but this is where technology is our friend. Even basic CRMs or more sophisticated CRMs, it doesn't matter what it is, but that's how you build that communication journey. That's how you're ensuring. We used to have a saying, we do it in threes. You sell them something, you give them something, and you give them some resources. And if you give them a very, your customers in particular, a very clear understanding of what you do, why they should trust you, that's where CRM really does its magic. And oftentimes CRM is used off to the side in sales, but it's a very powerful marketing platform as well. And I encourage everyone to kind of embrace it and really feel how helpful it could be in this trust journey.
Yeah.
I would just go prior to selling them something, today in particular, provide them some value, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Right? So get that value. And Nicole mentioned it too. Give before you expect to get. And I think we all know that. That's why we're all, everybody's giving a lot. And that just really sets the stage for you. So just wanted to put that in there.
Great
Okay,
point. Thank you.
Let's go on and let's talk about content, Judy.
I'm so excited. Thank you. We did a poll about 6 months ago about what is content marketing. And it was very basic questions. Do you know what content? And everybody said, yes, I know what content marketing is. And then when we asked the question, do you have a strategy for content marketing? Everybody said, yes. And then when we tried to get into how do they execute, that's when the whole thing fell apart. And so everybody understands what content marketing is. It's been around for decades. When P&G used to sponsor soap operas, that's how they became a name. Then there was white papers. So the idea of content marketing has been a basic core principle of any trust, of any brand building trust exercise. But what's changed that I want to share with you today is that while 30 years ago, content was really just about getting out there. You didn't have to worry as much about trust because if you could afford to get your message on TV or the newspaper, then there was some level of you're big enough. And so it was pretty flat. The goal of content was to get in front of eyeballs. When Hallmark did its family channel, it was just to get more eyeballs. They weren't trying to really promote anything other than their brand stands for these values. Digital changed everything. And yet a lot of the technologies that are now available in content marketing are getting adopted, but in a very disorganized way. So what I want to give today is a framework. Of how to think about content and how to think about operationalizing it, because content is, are we okay?
Yeah, your internet connection maybe was a little unstable for a second, but you came back.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I live in an old apartment. So let's just pretend we're starting from scratch. We know nothing about content marketing. It's a blank slate. How would we approach it, right? And step number one is to understand what content is necessary. How do you know what content is worth investing in? There are data tools to help you understand that. There are SEM and SEO tools. So you could do it by keyword, you could do it by topics. But the first thing you have to strategically organize is what to write about. This is where analyzing your site content is very helpful, because you could see what content is actually getting used and engaged with. Then the second step, and this is probably the most critical in terms of understanding how to structure it, is to understand that all content is not equally built to create trust. If you have a sales PDF that's trying to sell your software, people will read it because they need to learn more, but that's not going to help your trust battle much. It's just going to communicate, and it's an important piece of communication. So sales material is one kind of content, needs to be done, but it's not the most powerful trust builder. On the other side, you also have what we call SEO content, so that you could win in the Google discoverability wars. This is trust building, but it tends to be basic. It tends to be fairly straightforward. The jet fuel of building trust with content is what we call the resource layer. And let me explain what that is very precisely. The resource layer is what gives people information that they didn't already know or have. I'm going to use HubSpot as a great example of how they won, because they were really powerful in that resource level. So when they first came out, they were competing against Salesforce and lots of other companies. And what they cleverly did was send out lots of resources. They would send you templates of how to organize your social media. They would send you clip art on what to use. They would send you presentations. They would write content. What are the top 10 ways to do X? What are the best, most efficient ROI tactics, right? And that's the resource level. That level is the most powerful to create trust. It's not meant to sell a specific solution. It's really meant to help your audiences get smarter, because we all know a smart audience is better able to assess what you have to offer. And that's really an underutilized area of content, because it's easy to miss, right? It's easy to go from big thought leadership or big sales down to SEO content. That resource level is what Google loves. If you consistently do, lists of different things within your industry, eventually Google will index that very strongly. So the resource level is really, really key. Now, you still have the question of what resources should you talk about, right? Okay, you get this concept of you have your sales content, that's one class of content. You have your SEO content, that's another class of content. Now you have this resource level content. And again, the way you understand what to write about is with data. We have topic intelligence data that helps guide that. Your website data helps everybody understand what's being engaged with. And once you have that, now you can have a strategy. What are the resource levels of content that your company wants to offer to audiences?
And that goes back to the point that I was making earlier about the offer, not just always coming to the table with an ask.
Exactly.
Lead with an offer, or find that balanced cadence, right? Of when is it appropriate to ask, and put an ask out there as opposed to an offer.
Exactly right. I'm gonna go down one tiny technical rabbit hole, and I will say that I welcome anyone to reach out to me directly to talk about the new chat platform. I'm sure all of you have heard about it. I'm sure some of you think it's the God's gift to creation. Some of you think it's the devil incarnate. We've been working with it for 2 years now, and it's both. It is both your savior and it can be your devil. And so let me give you some basic principles on how to understand where it's best utilized and where it's not best utilized. There is a really clear, line in the sand of what it doesn't do. It is terrible at what I'm going to call executive or personal branding content. It doesn't do a good job there. In other words, like Nicole, if you were to do content on that, it would crap out. It wouldn't be able to express you. It would just express what the machine knows, right? So it doesn't do a good job, but it is really, really fabulous at the resource level, because these articles are exactly what the chat is meant, the platform is meant to create content. What are the top ways? And then a human editor must work with it. It's a co-creation. No machine is going to give you perfect content, period. Get that out of your head. What does happen is machines give you 60, 70% of it, depending on how well tuned it is. And then a human is what adds that authenticity, that trusted layer. And so it does make you able to create content probably 10 times faster. In our case, when we use it, we can execute a high quality technical white paper in about 3 hours, not 3 weeks.
Amazing.
And so now we could publish white papers once a week instead of once a month or once a quarter. So it totally enables this resource layer of content, because that's exactly where the AI is able to really cleverly say, oh, here are the top 10 ways to do X, whatever X is.
Mm-hmm.
It does not do great for personal branding because it can't really feel what you feel as you're writing, right? It isn't actually also great at SEO writing. So if you want an article just for a pure SEO, it'll do okay, but it's going to artificially stuff the keywords in there and it'll sound very stilted. So you can still edit it out. But it's that resource level where the platform really, really rocks. And again, I'm happy to talk to anyone if you have a use case that you want me to help you, puzzle out using the platform. I am happy to do it. But remember, it's both the devil and the angel. It's a savior. It's your worst nightmare. It's just how you use the tool. It's just a tool. That's all it is.
I want to helicopter in on the resource layer a little bit more, because it's the resource layer that also begets familiarity, right? It gives depth into who you are, what you think, what your opinions, your points of view, and that helps people know who you are and what you do.
Well said. Well said.
Somebody else put something in the chat about it. Don't just do a lead magnet. So if it's clickbait, it's the opposite of trust. Because what happens? I mean, how many of us have done this? It goes, hey, here's how you can make $1 million tomorrow morning. Click. And then it talks to you about something that's totally unrelated or gives you no information. Right. Play the lotto, right? You hate them. So, what it does, if you don't deliver, you've disappointed. And you never want to disappoint your
correct. Well said. Well said. Well said. Well said.
Is there anything else anybody wants to add before we pop on to the next? Okay. So we want to talk just briefly because we want to get to the Q&A. So I'm just going to briefly talk about this. So I always Google around prior to one of these to see, like, if I'm missing anything that I should be telling you. And Nicole does the same, and she popped me over this article last night, and it was about cross-culturally the idea of trust, right? And in every case, looking cross-culturally, they all had a bullet point that said that assessing, evaluating, assessing and evaluating things like behaviors and language and customs and beliefs are what people look for cross-culturally to evaluate trust, right? So, I'm sorry, it was respect across the board. And that was the piece that I forgot to headline with. Across the board, it was about respect, and the elements of respect are the ones that I just said, the behaviors and the beliefs and things like that. So the reason why I bring it up is that without respect, you're not going to have trust. And culture is part of building respect and getting respect. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tell you a quick story just to bookend everything that's been said already. And it's about a case that I had when I was recruited to be Director of Communications for New York City's Convention and Visitors Bureau. And it was a time where New York City was at its nadir, high crime, dirty, nasty New Yorkers. And we were brought in as a team to turn that around. So on the very first day that I walked into the office, I walked through the visitor center, which was on the bottom floor. And I walked through and I hear people going, no, boom. And I hear somebody else going, no, boom. I must have heard it 3 or 4 times by the time I walked through. They were hanging up the phone saying no. And I thought, oh my God, we are the personal. We're representing the brand of New York City as one big fat no. So I went to the boss, and the boss was like busy. He said, you go fix it. What I decided to do is create a Just Say Yes program. And yes, it was the time of the drug war right afterward, so it's kind of fun to do it. But the Just Say Yes program was that you had to find a yes in something. So you get a call, how many lights are on the Christmas tree at Rock Center, which, by the way, was a real question. And who knows? So the thing was to say, well, I don't know that, but I do have a list of all the Christmas events at Rockefeller Center. Can I give those to you? Right? You had to always find a yes. And so what I did was I incentivized that with food, rewards, and recognition, right? Within the group, because as everyone has said, you got to start with your foundation. If you're putting out anything negative or anything untrustworthy, that's your first line of defense. So what happened is they started doing this, right? And but what was notable was that no one had ever given those visitor-centered people any respect themselves. They were just this adjunct to the bureau that you were just like, okay, take care of that. But by making the program and by incentivizing and recognizing them, they felt respected by the company. And then they were showing respect to the visitors by finding yeses and finding ways to help them. And in return, the visitors were respecting them, and they were even nominated. And we got, letters from visitors saying so-and-so in the visitor center was fantastic, blah, blah, blah. So the only reason I tell you that story is that there's never been a day since then that we didn't approach a company and say, what are you putting out into the world at the very foundational level from your employees? And if you're a personal brand, answering the phone, what's your message like? Like, what is your first line of defense with your customers where you're putting forward you're a trusted brand?